Welcome to the Groundswell Podcast. I'm Elliot Sands, Executive Director of Live Faith First, and I'm with David Kim, author of Made to Belong, Five Practices for Cultivating Community in a Disconnected World, and also the Discipleship and Formation Pastor at Westgate Church. David, thank you for joining the Groundswell Podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah,
Excited for our conversation.
yes, me too. I have really enjoyed reading your book, which of course we're going to dig into some here. But what's kind of cool too is we're both here in Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
and so it's fun that we understand the culture that we're dealing with here in the Silicon Valley. But you've also grown up outside of California, and so tell us a little bit about your life, your background, how you got where you are. Just give us some cliff notes of your life here.
Yeah, I was born in South Korea, came to the States when I was 10 years old. My dad's a pastor and he wanted to go to Gordon Conwell Seminary. So we just moved. We packed our bags and it was, you know, I had no idea that my life would change right before my eyes. I'm like, oh, we're going to US. That sounds exciting, fun, cool as a 10-year-old. And I came to the States and everything changed right before my eyes. Language, food, culture, friends, neighborhood, church community. I mean, everything was brand new. And
Yeah.
so it was really overwhelming. My goodness. I talk a little bit about that in my book, but that led to some long, deep, painful journeys, which I can talk about in a bit. And and then we moved to New York City and went to Boston for my dad's school, but then I ended up going to Gordon Conwell as well, following the footsteps of my dad. And after totaling 3 cars in the winter storms of New England, I decided no more snow for the rest of my life.
That's
And
awesome.
my car insurance company also said we don't want to have you anymore. And so I think that was that. And so I picked the furthest thing away from Boston, which was California, and didn't have any friends or family members, nothing like that. I just applied to a church in San Jose and moved out here and
Wow.
been here 13 years and never want to go back. And I love it here. Yes, I'm paying for the weather, certainly, but it's kind of worth
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. That is the California joke, right? There is a weather tax. We pay
Yeah.
it on all kinds of different ways, but we do definitely pay that. Just a question I've always wondered, when you move as a 10-year-old, how much stuff do you bring with you? Like, do you bring like one suitcase? This has nothing to do with our conversation today,
Yeah.
but like, do you bring like a container full of stuff with furniture? Like, what did you bring with you from South Korea?
I mean, we're moving across the country, so like almost nothing. I think I
Yeah.
had like a bag, just like a small, maybe, yeah, just a carry-on. That's it. That's all I had. So
So your parents sold everything.
Well, yes, we didn't have much. My dad was, I mean, he was in ministry in Korea, and so we didn't really have much growing up, and so there wasn't really
Yeah.
much to be sold. So it was a pretty, yeah. We didn't have much
Yeah.
to pack, anyways.
Okay.
So it was good.
Okay. All right. Just curious. It
Yeah.
always amazes me because sometimes when North Americans move, we had friends who moved to Belgium and they like filled a container, right? I
Oh
think they're
yeah.
like putting their cars in there and furniture and like anyway, so I was just curious
Yeah,
what
I
your
think we had
experience
like
was with that.
2 or 3 like large kind of these like immigrant size bags we call them, and that's
Yes.
about it. And we stuffed everything in there and just moved.
That was it. All right.
Good
Cool.
times. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Recently, in the last 6 months, the Surgeon General came out and said that we are having an epidemic of loneliness in the US. Now, I don't like starting podcasts on a negative note, but I also want to like pinpoint some of the challenges that we're dealing with here in the US right now. What I find interesting about that is we talk about the word community a lot. Like if you look in the news or if you look on your Nextdoor app and those types of things, we talk about community. We have community centers. We have community building objectives. If you develop a property in San Jose, you literally have to have community areas, whether it's a park or some open space, right?
Hmm.
And yet we have an epidemic of loneliness. And so would you tell me a little bit kind of what is contributing to this disconnection in our society? Like where is this coming from? How do we get where we are today at this epidemic of loneliness when we're talking about community all the time?
Man, so much comes to my mind, but number one is I think we are becoming more and more individualistic in the sense that as we are getting into the digital age, like we don't even like we can order food from our phone, right? Like we don't even have to go anywhere. I mean, we could just sit and that's what COVID taught us. We could just be home and do everything on the tip of our finger, and that we understand. I don't want to knock down our comfort and the conveniences that technology has served us with. Like our folks in Silicon Valley who work hard to make our lives a little bit better, and we're grateful for that, right? We're grateful for your Amazon and your DoorDash, but at the same time, I wonder how that is serving our own journey of community and how we still need one another. But I
Yeah,
think we begin to believe the lie with our digital age that we can do life alone.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
there's that. And busyness is another one. I mean, like you hear this all the time. People move to Silicon Valley for work, not for relationships. And so, especially in the valley, like people are coming to climb the ladder and to make something of themselves. And so, with all of that, like they're just not thinking through. Like I need to spend some time and energy investing into the lives of others. And so, I mean, with all these factors combined, I would say though coming to the States when I was 10, looking back, I struggled with a lot of loneliness. I didn't understand the language and the culture. And so I got into all sorts of things, gaming, pornography, gambling, and all those things. Kind of looking back, it was my own way of self soothing and self medicating my own pain of loneliness. And I've been in, and you've been in pastoral ministry for a long time. I've been in pastoral ministry for over 20 years. And I realized that it's not just a David Kim problem. It's not just an
Mm,
immigrant problem.
mm,
That folks that we do ministry with, and folks even who attend churches, will say, hey, I still can't find my community. And I
mm.
still find myself very alone and isolated. And so we do have a significant problem. And I would say, that maybe even the way we do small groups, which churches, that's the primary way in which we build communities. Like, I
Yeah.
wonder, is it working? I know small groups is like the evangelical golden child, and I'm grateful for what it has done. I'm not saying we just throw it all out, but I wonder, is it really serving our people well in building deep relationships?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Much to be said.
Right. Yeah. That's a good, great question to ask, right? And of course, that's part of what you do as a career, right? That is your question to ask. Yeah. Another thing that comes to my mind when you say that too is we really live a curated life where I can curate my news, I can curate my food, I can curate my groceries, I can curate my preferences on and fill in the blank, whether it's my Google Mail or whether it's what foods you show me or my social media, like it no, either learns or I tell it me, right? And so in relationship and in friendship, it's harder to curate a friendship, right? Because
Hmm.
I can't make you who I want you to be. I have to find somebody who is somewhat maybe curated like I like it, and then hopefully we can figure it out. And so also, and that takes effort, right? That takes
Yeah,
effort to find those types of relationships. Um,
totally.
so with that, I'd love to ask you the question: how would you describe healthy community? So we've kind of looking at what some of the maybe builds into not great community or not great friendship. What would you describe healthy community or healthy relationship to look like?
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, again, while there's so many blessings with our digital age, one of the great curses of the digital age is the decline of emotional intelligence. And I do think that is also a part in contributing to our source of loneliness because we got to figure out how do we even relate to one another? How do we build friendships and how do we connect on a deeper level? Like, how do we like have soul to soul conversations? Like, how do we how do we overcome some of the fears of like having these conversations? And so because we're more comfortable sending out an email and a text, but if I see a human face to face, like, because this is now not the norm anymore, for the first time in human history, you're overwhelmed with a sense of anxiety, and so it's like hard to do it. And so I do believe that building a healthy community is getting harder and harder in this cultural moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, I mean, in my book, I talk about these five practices, and really these five practices, no matter what kind of church, what kind of communities you're building, because at the end of the day, we are all longing for something deeper. We are tired of shallow conversations and shallow relationships. And so I do believe that these five practices that I personally have journeyed alongside and that I have introduced to my community, and I believe that that could be a helpful way. I don't believe that it's the only way, but a helpful way to building the community. And so, and I could talk more about that, but yeah, that's kind of
Yeah,
my thoughts on that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. And we will. I have a couple questions, especially about two of the five practices. Um, Tell me, let's go to scripture. Would you tell us a little bit about, like, if we look through the scriptures, I mean, we're going to say yes, but is this a biblical thing? Like, do we need community? How did God create us with a need for community, or did he? Would you talk a little bit about what you see in the scriptures that kind of make this a good biblical practice as well?
Yeah, I mean, the first one that comes to my mind is just the beginning of the scriptures, how God, as we understand God to be, the triune God. God is already living in community, right? God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. So God is in community, and He made us for community, right? And so like, and so I believe that even in our own original design, made in the image of God, there's a hunger and a yearning to be in community because God made us in community. And so that's why as soon as God makes the first human, it is not good for a man to be alone. And I think there's a sense in which that where like there's a deep, deep, deep human design and a longing where it needs to be met by connecting with other folks. And that's, I believe, that's the journey of the whole Bible. And you see how God is constantly, and one of the primary way in which God works through people is by God sending others to them. Right? And so the way God
Yeah.
primarily answers prayers is by God giving other folks, sending prophets and sending leaders like Moses, and sending, and towards the end, giving us the gift of the church community, while there's also pain in the church community because we're all broken. But God, it seems to me that God answers and God gives and God blesses us and answers so much of our own prayers through the gift of community.
Yeah. That's good. And as North Americans, we've become so accustomed to our individualism, and how do we help ourselves and move ourselves forward, that it seems to me the concept of community ends up getting lost because it's
Hmm.
not something we practice regularly. I've said on the podcast before, I was a missionary kid and lived in Nigeria for 3 years. And if you go out into a village, uh, it's a very small, somewhat isolated, but also everybody knows each other community. And so the idea of the community comes very natural if you kind of live away from some of the urban centers that we all live in. And so it's interesting that in North America, this seems to be a bigger problem. And I don't know if it's an urban thing. And obviously, we're talking through a few of these things already around social media and technology and all of that. Um, but it's becoming a foreign concept. And yet you also see this longing for it, right? Where you do see people going to the gym and making community at the gym, right?
Yeah.
And making community in places where they can find like-minded people. In fact, my wife has been doing hybrid, but working from home 4 days a week. And honestly, it hasn't been great for her because she's not around people all
Yeah.
day. And so for her to be able to go back to an office, which gratefully she gets to do really soon here, actually for her is better. Like I know a lot of people want to do this hybrid thing or work from home, and
Yeah.
for her, it hasn't been a great emotional fit. She actually likes to be around teams. So um, anyway, all that to say, it seems like there is a longing in us for it, right? And that somehow it's something that God has created and put in us. Now, how we live it out, I think that becomes a challenge right now.
Totally. And as an immigrant coming to the States, like for me and our family, I mean, when you think about even like Maslow's hierarchy, the kind of the more essential needs, like for us, actually, the food and water wasn't even the primary thing. For us, it's belonging and community because we don't even know where to even get food and information, right? And so belonging actually and community becomes the core thing for especially immigrant communities so that we can figure out like how do we even navigate this world together. And so I've learned a lot, and I've been part of for a long time part of pastoring in an immigrant community. And we prioritize that because for us it's a matter of life and death, and I think that has really shaped our ethos and the way in which we approach life here in America. And with this kind of hyper individualism in our Western world, I would still say that it's impacting our community as well. But yeah, lots to learn from the ethnic communities and how they do community life.
Yeah.
And one other thing, yeah, like my wife's a therapist, and a couple things. I think God knew that I needed a lot of help, so I'm married to a therapist. So that for 24/7, I need counseling and healing. So that's yeah, well, that's my own issue. But she would say that so many folks who come with significant depression and anxiety and mental health issues, they all say like, man, like we don't have anyone that we feel safe around, and we're looking for some good friends and community. And so it feels like to me, at least kind of in our cultural moment, that a lot of folks are, even in their own mental health journey, like they're looking for that. And this is one of the reasons why there's so much anxiety and depression in our communities today.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about your journey, and then I do want to dig into how do we cultivate that closeness, because that tends to be it. Because if you look at your friends on Facebook, and I have 900 friends, right, or whatever the number is, right, 500,
Yeah,
300, whatever. It's like,
yeah.
wow, and yet there doesn't seem to be a closeness. But before we hop into that, tell us a little bit about your journey coming from South Korea, obviously the cultural integration, but especially around friendship and community. Like, what did that look like? It sounds like you struggled a little bit to connect, and what kind of pushed you over the edge towards healthy connection with people?
Yeah. Wow. So I would say, as a pastor's kid, I began to believe the lie that as spiritual leaders, we don't need others. We just need God. I somehow, maybe that wasn't really taught from the stage, but that's what I began to believe as I began to attend church. Like, wow, these people who are praying and faithfully serving the Lord and reading their Bibles, like the most spiritual folks, they don't need other people. They just need God. And I know that sounded super Christian or super spiritual, but I realize that's a false understanding of the invitation from Jesus. And so, as you know, I got into pastoral ministry at 18, and so for the first half of that, like I just tried to muscle out Christian life alone. And I think that was a deep, deep, deep mistake that I've made and I've learned from. Number one. Number two is that one of the things that really helped me kind of realize that I didn't have that many friends is that when I came to America, I met my best friend Paul, and he really helped me navigate and understand kind of New York City and the culture, language, and all of that. And I remember just like journeying with him for the next 8 years, and I was going off to college, and he wrote me this letter, which I talk about in my first chapter of the book. And he wrote me this letter saying, "Hey, David, like like we've been friends for 8 years, and I know we call each other best friends, but honestly, like you're the worst friend that I've ever had. And I think that kind of revelation and in the invitation for self-awareness, that was really painful for me. That he said, David, you're too self-centered. Like you only care about yourself, and you only reach out when I need, when you need me, and that's not friendship, man. And so I realized, oh my gosh, like in my own journey, like I have this kind of understanding that friendship is mainly transactional, and I will just reach out when I need you, and there's nothing of me to sacrifice and give because that's annoying and that's painful. And so before I blame the world and the church community why I don't have friends, maybe it's me. Maybe I am postured in a way where I'm self-focused and self-centered, and maybe I'm the reason why I don't have deep community. And that was a painful revelation. And I'm still learning that, and in my own formational journey.
Yeah. Yeah. That that letter, man, that had to be a slap in the face, right? I mean, maybe hopefully it was a cold bucket of water to realization, but still, man, that had to sting.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I still remember. It's been 20 years.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah, but it's helped. It's helped in serving me to think about community in a way where wow, like this is yeah, we don't find community, we build it. And
Yeah.
there's a thing that I'm supposed to do as well. Like I got to contribute to that. And so that's really helped me in my own journey
Yeah.
of building friendship. I have to reach out and I have to build and I have to contribute instead of saying, where are these all these amazing people? How come no one's calling me? How come no one's reaching out to me? Instead of blaming kind of the world for it, there's an invitation for me. And that's been
Yeah.
really helpful.
Yeah. You talk about five practices or five habits we can do to help cultivate this, and I'm I want to talk a lot about vulnerability, which you've just kind of stepped into for me here. But I'm going to give you the five. The five is priority, which again you just talked about, and then chemistry, vulnerability, empathy, and accountability. Would you talk to me a little bit about vulnerability? Because when you're sitting there going, "Why isn't anybody calling me?" Like sometimes it feels like just picking up the phone and calling or texting or emailing. Like even in that there can be this vulnerability, and hopefully it goes well beyond that, because what if they don't reply to me? What if they don't respond? Will they reject me? How, so talk to me a little bit about vulnerability and why that is so important as we build community.
Yeah. Vulnerability is so painful because at the end of the day, um, you are letting yourself be available to be wounded. I mean, that's what the literal word vulnerability means in Latin, right? To be capable of being wounded. And
Mm,
I think, kind of thinking about that, it's like when you ask, yeah, when I text a friend, say, hey, do you want to go out for a meal? Like there's a chance, like I do, like I'm busy or I don't hang out with you, or they might just ignore that text, and that could do a ton to my own psyche, right? And so, but if we're not vulnerable, if we do not open ourselves up, right, then what ends up happening is that then we end up being more guarded and more closed off, and we become more isolated than we've ever been. And so vulnerability is really an invitation to come out of hiding. Kind of,
mm, mm,
uh, I think about like again going back to the Genesis account of how Adam and Eve. Like I think humans, we naturally just hide when something happens.
mm,
That's what we do. We want to hide out of shame, out of pain. I don't think we're really good at dealing with pain, and shame can really cripple us, and so we hide from God and we hide from one another, and we wonder why we're so lonely. And we've been hiding since the beginning of time. And so there's an invitation. Vulnerability is just a biblical invitation to come out of hiding, to be known by God, and to be known by others. And that process, and for some folks, like as you're listening, you might come from significant church pain and hurt, or you've been wounded or been betrayed by your best friend, or your other Christian communities where you've opened yourself up and that has been met with significant betrayal. And I get that. And I understand that as a pastor, we journey many folks who are in that. And I've also been wounded in my own journey of vulnerability. But what other option do we have? Because the other option is to keep hiding from God and others. And we will be more and more alone and more isolated. And so there is a invitation for God to say, God, would you give us greater courage? And God, we hope and pray that as we become more vulnerable, that you would grant us good folks along our journey who would meet us with safety and kindness, not with abuse and condemnation. And so, yes, it is hard, but it's going to yield us a great connection. Because if we do not connect with vulnerability, then we are introducing a fake version of ourselves, right? Right? Because we're hiding things up. And so if we're known for a fake version of ourselves, then are we really truly known? Right? Then we're not. And so there's a real deep invitation for that. I know it's hard, but it's definitely an important piece for connection and community.
Yeah, that's good. I so much in that you said that I'd love to dig into. We're not going to here today, but I love all of those concepts. I'm going to ask you one question because we've all met this person. So I want to affirm, yes, we are naturally guarded, right? I think that's a natural. But then sometimes we meet that other person who it's like, you just vomited on me like your whole story, and there's that whole TMI thing. And so would you talk a little bit about like how we assure that we have a healthy person to be vulnerable with? Because that's part of it is we're guarded because I'm afraid of betrayal. But then sometimes we
Totally.
overshare and then we do get betrayed. And anyway,
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that dance, what that looks like as we,
Yeah.
build relationship.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think pastors and leaders and worship pastors are so great at doing therapy on stage. Like we like overshare and we vomit our own problems. And again, I think there's a beauty to being vulnerable on stage, but sometimes it's like, hey, like you should save that for your therapy session. Like you haven't even like really worked that out, and you're trying to burden the congregation, and now you're being irresponsible, right? And so, if you're a pastor or leader, I've done that many times, so I'm speaking from my own journey. But I would say one of the best ways where we learn this is by sharing just a little and seeing how they respond. That's how you gain a greater sense of trust. And so you share just a little bit and see if they overreact or underreact. See if that's met with empathy and kindness, or with shame and condemnation, or judgment, or criticism. And then oh wow, like I only shared this bit, and that's how they're meeting me. Oh, I can't now entrust them with more, right? And so I would say start little and see how they respond, and then give a little bit more. I think that's what we would call biblical wisdom, and that's what we would call understanding trust, and that's kind of how I kind of teach vulnerability, especially in small groups settings.
Yeah, that's good. That's helpful. Thank you. Let's talk about empathy a little bit. Those are the two that I wanted to talk today about:
Yeah.
vulnerability and empathy. Um, it seems like empathy is another, we're losing that art in our society as well, potentially. Um, what is empathy, and how do we do empathy in a healthy way? So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I would say empathy is doing our best to understand the other person. And really, that's just a simple answer to that. And the reason why we are so bad at empathy is because, there are many reasons for it. We're self-centered, self-focused, but more than that, I think about even like in our digital age, we are exposed to so much information and pain and trauma around the world that we have become numb to it. Like I open the news and I'm just again doom scrolling, right? Like I'm just scrolling through all sorts of tragedies, and now I've become so numb to the world's pain, and that now when a person shares their own difficulty, like I can't even lean in and relate, because I just like I just read about like 500 folks dying in Southeast Asia. And so like I just don't know how to even connect with your story anymore. And so I would say we have become so numb and dull to the world
Mm.
and to other people that we have to now retrain our mind and our bodies how to be empathetic. This is going to require a lot of work.
Yeah.
And the reason why empathy is the fourth practice is because when vulnerability, like imagine like you share something real that's really painful or something really special in your journey, when it's not met with empathy, like, oh my gosh, like tell us more, like we're praying for you, we're supporting you. If it's not met with empathy, then we will hide even all the more.
Yeah.
Vulnerability must
Mm.
be met with empathy to have deeper connection and community. And my goodness, church leaders are so bad at empathy. Like small group leaders are like, okay, I know you just shared something so tragic, but I gotta get to now question 5 in our small group. And so like, let's move on. It's like, oh my God, can we like pause at this sacred moment and can we lean in or can we like pause and pray for this? Because this feels like it's worth our group like stopping what we need to do.
Yeah.
Um, and so, or like a pastor or leader, like trying to teach in this moment, like a vulnerability, right? And like, hey, let me tell you like how to fix. It's like, my gosh. And so I think Christians, honestly, are some of the worst people at being empathetic because we rather teach, we have our own agenda, or we want to move on to the next thing. And so, yeah, there's an invitation for us to grow in that.
Yeah. That's good. And you're preaching at me. When I look at my spiritual gifts, unfortunately, empathy and compassion were down the list. What's helped me is that I I have to just recognize whether or not my heart feels it. I have to recognize that there's a moment that requires empathy in front of me. So whether it's you enter into an individual situation or we've done a lot of work in developing countries and you go in and you see poverty, and as much as maybe my heart isn't feeling this massive emotion around it, I also realize that the place they are is not okay. It doesn't fit the way God would have wanted it to be or wants it to be in the present. And so we're obligated to step in and help however we can. So one of the things for me is even when I'm not feeling, because when I think of empathy, I think of my emotional life. And I do have emotions. That is a very real thing with me, but it's not always empathy. And so I literally have to trigger my brain to say, hold on, stop. Like, this is a moment to step in that person's shoes, right? You need to be empathetic right now. My first my first hospital visit, I was still just dating Penny, who's now my wife, and we walked out and she's like, "You're terrible at that. Let me do all the talking next time. You just close with prayer." Because like I didn't have the face, I didn't have the like there was my words weren't, like whatever.
Yeah,
And so she's like, "I got this. I have empathy. Let me take care of this one for you. You just do the pastor prayer and so on." And anyway, so but my point also is it is something that can be learned and it is something that can be recognized and it is something
agree.
that we can grow into and get better at even in the midst of, and I love the way you said it, we get numb to it because of all that we see around us and all that we are exposed to, and whether in the news and so on. So,
Yeah.
um,
Eh, yeah. Yeah. And I would say, these 5 practices, priority chemistry, vulnerability, empathy, accountability, the order of it is really crucial. So, for
mm,
example, I know we don't have time to go into all 5, but the reason why I put accountability as the 5th and the last practice is because for many Christians, as they're building and forming friendship, community, connection, they put accountability as the first practice. Like, I don't even know you. I'm not even prioritizing our relationship. And I'm now confronting you, rebuking you in the name of Jesus with the scripture. And I'm not going to, follow up with you again. I don't really even like love you at this point, right? I don't even know your full story, but I lead with accountability because, again, it's just unfolding my own agenda over your life, which is not the biblical invitation. So when you have accountability at the end, once I have prioritized you and we've built some rapport and chemistry and we have opened up and we have met with empathy, now we can get to this final and the most beautiful thing where now I can invite you to all that Jesus wants to do in your life. That's how I define accountability. And when we get to that, now you feel loved and cared for. Like, wow, you are diving into awkward waters because you care about my own discipleship to Jesus, my own formational journey, and you're going to speak in truth and love. And because you have shown your commitment to me and you have opened up and we have empathized one another, it's met with, even though it's still hard, it's met with a lot more care and compassion. And so these the orders of the practices are really important. And I believe when you have all five, we're really able to build, again, a Christ-centered, Christ-honoring community. Because if we just end with empathy, the goal is not just to end there. The goal is still, we got to figure out a way to encourage one another to be all that Jesus wants us to be, right? And so some Christians just end there, and that's why I believe accountability is really important. And so those are kind of the five practices.
Yeah. That is so good. Thank you. I always love it when something is intuitive to me, and I haven't put a name and a title and an order to it, and you just did that for me. So thank you. I love that.
Yeah.
That is super, super helpful. I got two more questions for you,
Yep.
but my next to last question here is, we talk a lot at Live Faith First about crossing bridges, especially across ethnic, socioeconomic, generational, political, these kind of divides that sit in our society. We look at Revelation and we see that we're all going to be hanging out together,
Mm-hmm.
all nations, all tongues, right? All languages. And yet, often here, on this side of glory, we don't do a great job of that. We like to hang out with people who think like us and talk and so on. And so, can you talk a little bit about kind of how this idea of community works in a multi-ethnic, kind of across divides type relationships?
Yeah. So good. So, the reason why priority, and what I mean by priority is intentionality and commitment to one another, why that's the foundational and the first building block in forming and forging community, is because if priority is not the first thing, if I come with just assumptions about these ethnic groups or certain folks who are from different kind of educational background, right? We all have our own assumptions and our own kind of thoughts about certain ethnic groups and folks like that. And because of that, we cannot really even build communities because we are pushing them away because of some of the false assumptions that we have about others. But if I now prioritize you and am committed to you, I begin to realize that we have actually more things in common than I actually thought. And so having priority as the first building block, say, hey, like, I might have some assumptions, but let me just commit to you and let's build friendship. And in that place, I'm going to find out all the beauties and all the things that God will surprise me with. And that's what happened with me, because I grew up in an ethnic church and I served in an ethnic community all my life. So coming to a multi-ethnic community was really scary for me. And to pastor in that was really scary. And I had my own reservations and my own thoughts about the American people. And once I began to just commit and prioritize my Westgate people, God began to surprise me. All the beauties and glories of how beautiful God's kingdom is and how beautiful these folks are. And that I had more things in common than I had really assumed it to be. And so whom God has surrounded you with, to prioritize that, I believe, is actually the one of the most important things before coming in with our own assumptions about others.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. So good. I love it. All right, here's my final question for you today. What is exciting you right now? What project or trend or Bible verse, something in your family, something around you, but what's encouraging you right now when you think about what's going on in your world around you?
Yeah, so much going on, but maybe I can just speak only from my own community here at Westgate Church. I think people are post pandemic, people are more hungry for deeper community and deeper connection. And so I'm seeing that people are leaning in more than they've ever done before. And
Mm,
so that's been really encouraging to me. I think COVID has exposed the shallowness, maybe even of our faith, even of our communities, even of our small groups. And so there's a longing for depth and deeper kind of realities in life. And so it's while it's still challenging to be in pastoral ministry, I just feel like God has given us, I'm not saying COVID has been a blessing, God has given us a blessing of greater self awareness
mm,
and has woken us up in some sense. And so it's a great place to really lean in as a pastor in this moment. So, really grateful.
yeah. Awesome. Well, David, thank you for your time today. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed this conversation. I love it. Go out and grab David's book. All right. I'll go ahead and put it in the show notes, but you can just go on Amazon and find Made to Belong: 5 Practices for Cultivating Community in a Disconnected World. And David, from time to time, also preaches at Westgate. I heard a message from him a couple months ago, and it was awesome as well. I guarantee, though, you're going to cry a little bit near the end when you hear some of the story. So get ready for, with some tissues with you. But David, thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really appreciate having you with us.
Thank you, and grateful for your work. Appreciate you as well.
Everybody, let's go out today and live faith first.